Morning to you all from my little studio here in Cheshire in the UK. It's rather overcast and grey morning this morning, so um, it's nice to be in what is a nice warm snug studio here. Back to work on this painting that I've been doing that I started on Friday. If you watched it on Friday, you'll see me. You will have seen me take it to this stage before I stopped for the weekend. Um, I had a little look at different parts of it, and I've worked out what I'm going to do next, and see all the things that I'm happy with, and all the things that need to be tweaked and brought on. I'm working from this photograph. As you can see, it's a very cute picture of two very cute kids. Um, I'm quite happy with what I've got so far. I'm quite happy with the overall look of it. I'm quite happy with the overall feel of it. I want it to be warm. I want it to be um, what shall I say? Emotionally warm, but also painterly warm as well. So one of the things I want to point out is one of the things that I've been doing this live streaming now for just over a week really, and one of the things that I have found is getting a consistency of colour on the cameras, not on the painting. The painting looks fine. If you're here with me, the painting looks absolutely fine. It's getting a consistency of colours on the camera for you to see. And at the moment, I think this one isn't too far off. This is basically well, let's put it this way. What I can see on my screen is very similar to what I see down here. Um, I have found that as the light coming through the window that's in front of me changes slightly, which it's not going to change much today by the looks of it. It's very grey. But as that changes, the cameras pick up the colour slightly differently, and I might have to tweak things as I go along. Um, but one of the things that I'm totally aware of is that what you are seeing is not the same necessarily as what I am seeing on my screen, because every device that you look at this on, it looks different, and that's just the nature of technology. That's just the nature of a reproduction. I mean, if you search on Google Photos, say, and do a search for a famous painting, search for Constable's Haywain, or search for Van Gogh's Starry Night, or anything that you know that image, you've seen it a million times, search for it on Google Images, and then look at all the images that pop up on the screen, and every one of them will be different, and you will have no idea which one of those images is actually anywhere near the real painting. And that's the nature of reproduction. So what you're seeing on your screen is hopefully as close as we can possibly get to what I am doing down here. It won't be that far off, but the chances are it's not going to be ideally the same. One thing I can tell you is that the actual painting down here is always better than the reproduction, and I can guarantee you that. I've said that to people before, and I think they think I'm bullying them in some way or whatever, but always when they open the package, when the painting arrives at their home and they open it up, the first thing they say is, "Oh my God, it's even better than the thing I saw on the computer screen." So, with that in mind, where are we going to go with this? What we're going to do, I think, is just tweak the background a little bit more, just to add the ivy down the side of the tree a little bit more. And I'm going to take off the masking fluid that we got here on the tree and paint in the ivy. Then I'm going to work on the children's clothes, and finally, at the end of it all, we'll do the hands and we'll do the faces and the hair and all that sort of thing. So, let's see where we are. Let's see what we're going to do with this. I'm going to go back to working on the saucer. I'm going to clean that off. That's from working on the tree the other day, and the tree is pretty much how I want it. So I'm just going to wet that with a big brush and give it a wipe with some kitchen paper, some paper towels, and we'll take it from there. If you watched any of my videos last week, you may have seen me using this saucer. When I actually get working on the figures and all that sort of thing, I shall go back to working on these sort of palettes. I've got one here. This one here is a nice ceramic flower shaped palette. If I just pull that up there, you can see here as well. I've got one here in my paint box with all these different little modules in here for mixing in. I use those, but here I'm going to be working predominantly in different shades of green, so I find it best just to work on a saucer, because that way as I work we'll pick up different I can pick up different parts of green from the actual saucer. So I'm just starting here with a base of sap green, which I am tinting up to a little bit more warm yellow with some yellow ochre. And then I'm going to knock it back a little bit with a touch of Payne's Grey. And I think that's going to give me the sort of green that I want to bring in this area here to add the darker foliage that we're still in the background. We're not working on the ivy on the edge of the tree yet, but we're filling in a little bit more depth to the background while still keeping it loose and still keeping it soft. We don't want it to be hard. We're talking hard and soft lines constantly when we're working on a painting, whether it's watercolour, whether it's oil, whatever it is. We want a combination of hard lines and soft lines. We don't want it to be we don't want lots and lots of hard lines, especially in the background here, because that's it. We have that nice soft focus that, and now I am quite aware, before anybody says anything, that the soft focus element of it all is, in this situation, mainly caused by the lens of the camera. And I don't like being a slave to the camera lens. If anybody has seen me painting in any of my videos before, I do not like being a slave to the camera. But it's also a painterly device that's been used over the years by artists to create and work with what's known as atmospheric perspective. The fact of the matter is that the more distant things get away from you, the further into the distance they go, the more air you are looking through. I mean, this is what it's basically caused by. The more air you are looking through to actually see the things in the distance, and that air that you look through has the effect of creating a haze. And things become softer and generally bluer as they go into the distance. Well, in this situation, the lens has helped with the depth of field to give us a softening of the background image. And in this particular instance, I think that makes a real difference to this particular image. So I'm going to go with that soft focus in the background, tightening it up as we come closer. That way we get that nice perspective into the painting. So I think that'll do me for the moment. I just wanted to basically pull that into place. I noticed when I was looking at the image over the weekend that this sort of darker area here sort of adds an extra layer of depth to the image. So we've got the nice, really soft areas in the background, and then I just wanted to bring in these few little darker bits and maybe a little slightly more defined bits as we get closer to just give an extra layer of depth. You'll see an extra layer again of depth appear when the ivy that I'm going to start working on now starts to come off the tree and encroach into that background. And you can see it on the actual image. If I show you the image again, you can see that the ivy on the tree encroaches onto the background and comes forward again. We're working in levels. We have the very soft background, then we have the tree with the ivy on it, then we have the children, then we've got the leaves in front of them, and it's all levels, and we're trying to use that depth to create depth in our painting. So So far, so good. I would like to say good morning to everybody that is watching here, and of course, hello to anybody that's watching. Goodness knows how long into the future. It's a strange, strange world that we live in, where I'm talking to people now, and I know that people can be watching this in years' time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. Goodness knows how long it'll hang around on social media, how long it'll hang around on things like YouTube and Facebook and all that sort of thing. So back to the overhead there. I think there we go. So you can see what I'm doing, and you'll see here. I think that already, just by adding that little bit of extra green there, that little bit of extra definition, we're pulling it into place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take off the masking fluid here on the tree. Now, if you were watching on the earlier video on Friday, you will have seen me mask out lots of different areas of this painting, and lots of different areas for different reasons. And these areas that I masked out here, but specifically to give me some ivy shapes, rough ivy shapes. They don't have to be, it doesn't have to be sort of delineated, beautiful, sharp ivy shapes. That's not the way the world works. But I wanted to save these ivy-ish shapes so that when I add the green to them now, we can pull out the ivy. I'm also going to take off this area here, because I'm sort of happy with what's the underpainting, the background painting, and I did put on some masking here to retain the very light areas where the sky is pushing through the leaves. The light of the sky is pushing through the leaves of the tree. There we go. I'm quite happy with that. Might work into it slightly when we get to the, probably going to get to the tweaking stage towards the end here. So I'm going to take off, this is what you might call the background area of the masking. There's foreground masking as well. Okay, there's foreground. Here in the boy's clothes, we've masked out the areas where the seams are on the denim. That'll be very useful. And we've also masked out right at the front here, and this will come off last. This is the foliage at the front to keep some kind of distinction. But for the moment, we're going to just take off the background masking and the masking on the tree. Remember, at this time as we're working on it, nothing is set in stone. We can always make changes, we can always tweak things. One thing you've got to be very, very careful of is to get all the masking off the painting. You don't want to leave a little blob of masking and finish the painting and go, oh yeah, everybody says how lovely it is and that sort of thing, and you put it into a frame, seal it into the frame, and then you suddenly notice that there's a little bit of masking been left on, and it's so easy to do. It really is. So be very careful. And what I do is I do it quite often. I've got very clean fingers. I wash my hands before I start to paint. But just by touching, you can work out where any tiny little bits of masking might be. it's much easier to do it by touch than it is to do it by sight. Right. So let's start putting in now the ivy, and we want a darker green. So I'm working again with a base of the sap green. Just a little touch of the yellow ochre, but not as much. And then we're going to knock that back again with some Payne's Grey. We want to keep the intensity, but we want to darken the tone of the green. Which is there we go, that's better. If you can actually, maybe for this I'm going to go to that shot, and I think that makes that. Now you can see the palette down here, and the green that I'm working with it's got intensity without being vivid. Because what we don't want is a vivid, unnatural green. What we want is an intensity of green, and that might be okay. Let's see how that goes. We never want it to be the style that I paint in anyway. I never want it to be flat. I always want each bit of colour to have colour changes within that colour, because that's the way life is. You know, there isn't one green as I look out there. I've got a window in front of me. I'm not sort of staring into nowhere. I've got a window in front of me, and through that window I can see trees and bushes and all the rest of it, and I can see a million different leaves and different shades and everything, and each one of those leaves has got a different it's got lots of different greens within each leaf even. So what we don't want, what I never want, is flat colour. I don't like flat colour. It can be used as a device when you're painting, and it can work if that's the style that you're painting, but it's not the way that I paint. Let's add a little bit of more pigment over here. One of the great things of working on a saucer is as you work on different areas of it, you get all those different shades of green appearing in this blob on the saucer, and from that you can pick off different intensities and different colours, different shades of green. This is what I often do when I'm working with one particular colour. This is all going to be green, but different levels of green. Different depths of green. And we're coming out of the darkness of the tree, and we want to be able to see the ivy, but we don't want it to be unnatural. We want it to be seen, but to be toning in. There we go. this is where your masking fluid saves you so much time and energy from, you know, what I'm actually doing here is I'm basically colouring in the white areas that the masking fluid has preserved for me. Sometimes we can take a bit of the grey in it, light grey as well, and filling in those areas with different blobs of green, different intensities of green, different shades. And so that these white marks on the paper suddenly change from being just white blobby shapes to being perceived by your eye as ivy leaves. Because part of it's because you know that this is obviously ivy growing up the tree. And so it doesn't matter that some of the shapes are random, because actually that's the way that it really looks. You can't see every individual ivy leaf unless you really go up and stare close. What you see is texture, and what we're doing here is recreating texture. By the way, I do have my chat room open, so whatever platform you are watching on, whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube or Twitch, if you type into your comments section, it will appear in my chat room, and I'm only too happy to engage with you. It does make these painting sessions go much more, well, it's much more enjoyable when you know that there's people out there watching, and it's nice to know where people are. It's nice to know who's out there in the world and where you are. I should imagine at the moment that the people watching are either in the UK, where it is now 10:37 in the morning, or further east, where it's later in the day. America tends to join in the afternoon sessions because they are, 5, 6 hours, 7 hours or whatever behind us, and it's the middle of the night over there, or very, very early morning. Yeah, I hope you can see here the ivy appearing on the tree. I'm dipping into the green. I'm changing the intensity of the green here and there by giving it a little bit more Payne's grey in different areas, darkening bits down. I can always dab in there and just take a little bit of colour off with my trusty kitchen towel. a little bit of a sort of grey bluey tone off this old paint on the palette here. I love to paint with the old paint on the palette because I tend to work in the way that I do. My palette doesn't change drastically from one painter to another. So I'll often find when I keep the palettes, keep the dirty paint from previous paintings, it will key in with what I'm doing quite nicely. Now, I think what we need to get here is a slightly more strength to that green as it leaves the edges of the tree, so that when it's against the green of the background we can see it, more definition there. I'm not going to go yet close to the face. I'm going to do the face first and then put that in at the end, because I don't want to, when I'm working on the colours in the face, I don't want to be picking up greens. It's not very pretty. But I am going to just put in these bits down here. There we go. I'm going to take that bit away. That I can see that is there on the painting, but on the photograph, but I find that a little bit distracting, that bit there. Let's just knock it back. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the boys' clothes. And I know traditionally we say we work in watercolour and we go from light to dark, which you see me do on the background there. But sometimes logistically you have to take into account things like the fact that I'm right-handed, and so if I work on the girl here, and if I work on the girl's clothes first, then I've got to put my hand over the top of that to paint the boys. And logistically that could be dangerous. I could smudge what I'm doing here. Now, I know it'll dry, but I don't want to drag my hand over the top of this too much to get to this. So let's get over here and put the boys' clothes in, which should not be that arduous because it's all different shades of the same colour, of a deep sort of, it's a very dark ultramarine. So I want to let's mix that up. Let's get rid of the saucer and bring back this baby and start getting some nice dense ultramarine. Ultramarine blue is just a wonderful colour. This is actually French ultramarine. This is what it's called, French ultramarine, and it's a synthetic ultramarine. If I was to buy genuine ultramarine, so to speak, well, I couldn't afford it, because genuine ultramarine is made from a gemstone. It's made from lapis lazuli, and because of that, it's extremely expensive. There's a hair off the brush there, take that out of the way. But luckily, I think somewhere in the 19th century, some fantastically clever paint chemists realised that they could get the same colour, more or less, synthetically. And so that's what I'm working with, and what 99.9.9% I was work with. But it's such a great colour to work with because it's in so many things. But what I've just done there is I'm bringing in. I think I'm going to need quite a little bit of pigment, but I want it to be a dense, sort of dark pigment, so there's not a huge amount of water. I need enough water to give it bulk, but not to particularly dilute it, because these clothes that he's got on are quite intense dark. And what we've got is a mixture of ultramarine to get the blue areas mixed together with a small amount of Payne's grey to just deepen it, take away that glow and give it depth instead. So actually we've got quite, as you can see here on the palette, we've got quite a dense colour here. Now I've taken the time, as you will have seen before, to mask off anything that comes in front of the boy, i.e. the grasses and everything. And I've also taken the time to mask off here the white of the seams and the denim. So what I can do now is I can just apply this colour as a wash. Over the whole thing. Now I'm going to darken this even more. and make it even more dense here with the addition of Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey just works with so many other colours, and it really is a wonderful universal colour. That actually in the background there is partly, you just blow it up there, yeah, it's partly the boy's collar and partly the background having a dark area. Or is it? No, it's not. It is actually the way his jacket is going. It's a very strange outfit he's got on, this sort of all-in-one jumpsuit idea. One of the great advantages, of course, of working on a tablet is the fact that I can pinch and zoom in on areas and pick up more detail. I'm just darkening down this area here. Same here, putting some more panes in there, getting into the shadow areas, keeping it soft because we are working on a fabric, and the fabric is not changing colour in hard ways. It's not really got a lot of creases in it. It's changing colours gradually. Tone, say, really, rather than colour. It's not really changing colour much. Let's just get a little bit more pigment in here. A little bit more to work from. All the time you're being aware that try and get used to the working with the different densities of pigment. Some areas want to be dense and some areas want to be light, and it's all to do with how much water you have in any particular wash and how much pigment is in that water. Not rocket science really, I don't suppose. But people do seem to struggle with that at first, is getting the balance between the pigment and the water. Just get a bit more raw Payne's Grey into this here. And then we will let the paint dry thoroughly, and that is a very, very, very important word to emphasize there. We will let the paint dry thoroughly before we try and take that masking off. Here's an interesting little fact. I always like to work on high quality paper, and paper with a particular type of tooth, and I like to work on blocks. This is a block of paper. It's glued all the way around the edges, except for a tiny little bit here where that's left, so that you can get your knife in there and take it off at the end. And you can buy different grades of paper. We've talked about this before. This particular grade is called cold pressed or knot paper, and it's a sort of medium grain paper. Now I like to work on I always like to work on cotton, 100% cotton rag paper. It works in a particular way, and it's very strong, and it gives a very definite sort of feedback as you paint. And everything that you've seen me working on up till now, if you've watched any of the other videos in this series, I've been working on a small tablet, half this size, on 100% cotton rag paper. Now, it didn't occur to me, this pad it's not mine. It belongs to my son. He bought this one. And when I wanted to do a slightly bigger painting, I thought, well, I'll just use one sheet off this block. But it didn't occur to me until after I'd finished the first session. I knew something was different, but it wasn't clicking. And when I looked, I realised that, if you see here, this is the same make of paper that I was using. This is Daler-Rowney Langton paper. But this is not, even though it's acid free, it's good quality paper, good quality mould made paper. This is not 100% cotton, which means that this is a wood based paper. Nothing wrong with that. It will still, it's still high quality. It will still last you for hundreds of years and all that sort of thing. But it works slightly differently. The one I think the one on my smaller pad says the Langton Prestige, and then it says 100% cotton, and this isn't, and it does work slightly differently. And it also means that you have to be a lot more careful taking off the masking and taking off the masking tape, because this paper, if you're not careful, will tear, and we don't want that. So one of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure that I leave this area before I take off the masking that I've got here and work on the seams in the clothes. I will let it dry totally. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat here, early morning croak. Please feel free to comment at any time. Announce yourself, say hello, tell me where you are. I like that. I like conversation when I'm painting. it's a bit of an unusual thing otherwise, to be perfectly honest, sitting here in my little studio, painting away, knowing that people are watching, knowing that people could be watching this in the future, and sort of talking away to you. And especially in this, what do you say, long format type of video where you're watching me in real time. This is not edited. There's no going back and so no. Oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I hadn't painted it like that. Let's do it again, or whatever. This is the real thing, so to speak. This is the real deal. Let's just mark that back in so I can see where I'm going here. I don't want to lose the drawing. Yeah, because oh, what I was saying, in this sort of long format sort of video that we're doing here, it's very easy to not realise how much you are actually talking, how much airtime you're actually filling in. Yeah, that's it. I want a little bit more masking there. Where's my mapping pen? There it is. Let's save these areas. Make our lives easier. Yeah, you don't realise how much airtime you're filling up by talking. You know, you watch good old Bob Ross on his Joy of Painting programmes. You know, they're on average about 20 minutes long. And each one of those programmes of 20 minutes, Bob actually painted the same painting 3 times so that they could get the best of 3 takes and edit it all together to make that 20-minute program. Yeah, and so you shall I? No, I think I'll leave that. It's very tempting to mask the arm as well, just to make sure that I keep the shape. But I think it'd be better if I. One thing you can get sometimes when you mask is you can get like a pooling of pigment, up against the edge of the mask, which can be a little bit tricky. It's not what you want, so to speak. So I'll choose on this particular occasion. That's better. That's it. On this particular occasion, I'll choose to. I'll leave that. I'll put the arm in after, and I won't let it pool. Yeah, so saying, to make Bob Ross's 20-minute 20-minute program, he'd paint the same painting 3 times, and then they'd edit it. This is long form. This is me. You are watching me here in real time. And so some of these paintings take, well, that don't know whether you saw the last painting that I did, which was half the size, of the man holding the chicken. And I was working it out last night. I've made a what do they call it? A speeded up version of it, where I've reduced it down to a minute. But what I've realised, and it took me a while to do it, because I've actually brought down 9 hours of painting into 1 minute, which was quite something to attempt to do, and hopefully it works well. I shall be putting it onto Instagram this morning. But these paintings take time, and I tend to try and keep talking through most of it. Though you'll find, as I get into real close detail, like on the faces and that sort of thing, I tend to go quieter, because I'm concentrating very much on what I'm doing there. But otherwise, I tend to be talking for sort of 8-9 hours as a stretch, which is quite some feat, to be perfectly honest. Though my wife would probably say that I do like the sound of my own voice, and she's probably right. How's that looking? I think that's coming along nicely. I'm not going to touch any of this masking now until it's thoroughly dry. I think let's do the neck of the t-shirt and the shoulders while the masking fluid on the pink dries and the little bit of masking that we put here on the trousers dries. Denim's really nice to do in watercolour. Denim, watercolour, denim likes watercolour. So what I'm doing here is this is this is manganese blue. It's a nice. It's not quite the same as the colour next to it here, which in the box, don't know whether you can see it, is more common. It's cerulean blue. The manganese is slightly more towards the turquoise, but with a touch of that and a touch of the ultramarine, we should get a colour that is sort of near to the colour of the girl's t-shirt. Let's see. Yep, happy with that. What matters to us is it looks nice. On the painting. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly the same blue as the photograph, because we don't slavishly have to adhere to the photograph. We're making a painting. I keep saying this. It's one of my things. In the hours and hours of talking that I do making these videos, it's one that keeps recurring. We are making a painting. We are not. The point of this isn't to create a photograph, because they've already got a photograph. They've sent me a photograph. I'm looking at a photograph. They don't need another photograph. What they want is a painting. So what we're making is a nice painting, and that painting will stay on the walls of their house, and people will not be comparing it all the time to the photograph. They'll just be looking and going, oh, what a nice painting, hopefully. Well, it's all about making people happy. Bit highlight there where the light comes down. That's one of the nice things about these pigments, is that they take off well. They're not staining colours. Some watercolour paints are staining, some aren't. I like that. I'm happy with that. Now, one of the things that I think I warn people to be careful of, because it's something that I found myself doing in the early days of painting professionally, as because we see because the majority of the images that we see every day of the year, because they're reproductions, they're photographs. Even the paintings that we see are photographs of paintings, not the real thing. And we see, I mean, let's face it, because my social media feeds are primarily art based. We see them all the time. I see photographs of paintings all the time, and I see photographs all the time, and you tend to find that your mind starts to compete with that photograph. And that photograph smooths everything out. It doesn't give you this, you cannot see on a photograph the qualities of the paint that are here. You're looking at a reproduction and it glosses it off for you. It messes with your head, and you have to start remembering as an artist that it's okay for people to see the paint. In fact, that's what makes it exciting. What makes it exciting is for people to actually see the paint on the image. So don't be afraid of you know, letting the brush marks show, because that's what artists for centuries have done. And it's not until you go to a gallery, go to a civic collection, go to a nice big art gallery and walk around and look at the paintings that you've seen in reproduction in books or on the internet hundreds of times, thousands of times, and go up and have a look at those paintings and see the paint. It changes your perspective, and you come away and you think, I know what I've been doing wrong. What I've been doing wrong is so obvious now. And what I've been doing wrong is I've been competing with the photograph. I've been smoothing everything out too much. And not letting the paint give life to the painting. Anyway, back to this. Let's start here, and what I'm doing now is I'm going to put on, first and foremost, the shadows. I'm going to put the shadows in. And put the shadows in because they give me a roadmap of where everything else is going to go. I don't want too much pigment, I don't want it to puddle too much. This again goes against the whole thing of you have to work light to dark when you're working with watercolour, because, well, if you've watched me in any other of the paintings that I do, you'll realise that quite often I don't. Quite often I will do this thing that you're seeing me do now. And I will put in the shadows. I'll put in the dark bits early on, and then as I paint the lighter areas in, it allows the dark bits to soften, which to my mind looks nice. People ask me how I People do ask how I do this, how I get the detail in, get the and I like to give an answer that's the same as I watched. I watched a chap painting on an art program a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago. Painted these really beautiful, detailed oil paintings, and I steal his answer. He says, "People ask me how I get so much detail into the painting," and he says, "Actually," and the answer I gave is actually quite easy. And I've stolen his answer over and over again now, because the answer is I start painting, and then I keep painting until I finish the painting. And the more I keep painting, the more detailed it gets. And that's the answer. And I thought, he's right. How do you get the detail in? You just keep going and don't stop until you've got all the detail in. I mean, that does oversimplify it. Fact of the matter is that I think part of the learning curve, part of the process, is actually learning when to stop. When you've done enough. But it's also knowing it's also daring to go a little bit further as well than the average Joe will. I think one of the things that artists, when they're starting out learning about watercolour and learning about painting in any way at all, is that there is a tendency to be afraid of almost being afraid of the paint, being afraid to go too dark. And so you end up with pale, undefined, insipid sort of paintings, because you're afraid of putting in the contrast, putting in the depth. And it takes practice, and it takes time, I suppose, to build up the confidence. To build up the confidence in what you're doing, to be able to keep going. I can't. Yes, there is some there. Right. So we've got the darks in there. Let's now clean piece of kitchen roll, because this is a put on take off situation. And we can come across here, and remember we've got the areas masked, so we've got the very lights, and we put in the shadows, so we've got the very darks. Doing quite well so far this session. I haven't actually so far, touch wood, knocked everything flying. This stand that I've got for my tablet here is so precarious. It's fine in landscape, but in in portrait like this, it's so unstable. And I mean, I've already, to be honest, I have knocked it flying twice already, but that was actually before we started recording. So, and you'll see that, I don't know whether you can see here, but the shadows that I was putting in, that I've put in before, as I've washed over the top of them with the pigment, the shadows have softened. Which is what we want. We don't want them to be hard, we want them to soften. I have to be so careful when I'm touching this tablet. Not to, that's better, not to knock it flying. Trying to keep everything soft and clothy, if that's a word, while building up the density of the pigment here in certain areas. Do for a moment. I don't think there's any masking fluid there. Take that off. We're coming there, we're getting there. Pardon me. Again, we can. It's now essential now to let that dry before we take off that masking fluid and work in the detail. I think we can now put in the pink top. Pink is a strange colour. You'd think, okay, well, just use a pale red. Let the paper show through. And yes, that will work to some degree. But that particular pink that we can see there, that's quite tricky to get. So to be perfectly honest, I'm not going to worry about too much about getting the exact pink. I don't have a huge amount of red in my palette. It's not it's not a colour that I use much. I tend to stick to alizarin crimson and rose doré, both of which will give a particular type of pink. So we'll go with that and it'll be fine. Working with a very, very, very wet wash of a mixture of alizarin crimson and rose doré. We'll build up gently, build up steadily a little intensity in this pink. If we go too far, then we will lose the pinkness, because it's only pink because there's a lot of water and very little pigment, and the paper, the white of the paper showing through, is allowing us to perceive it as pink. And I know it's not got that intensity yet of the photograph, but hopefully as I build up the pigment, it'll get more intense without being shockingly intense. Take that off with a dry brush. Don't want any pooling. What I'm trying to make sure I do is maintain the glow of the white paper coming through as I add the pigment, and if I added too much pigment I would lose that glow and I would lose any sort of power in the pink. So each successive layer still is adding a little bit more pigment, a little bit more pigment, a little bit more pigment, until we get it to where we want it. This is watercolour. It will of course dry to some degree lighter than you see it when it's wet. That's just the nature of watercolour. that's dry. Let's see what happens. I might be happy enough with that. We'll have to put in some shadows on as well, but I'll let it dry a minute. While that dries, why don't we go through it and take off the masking on the boys' clothes, which are now, the paint has dried, and so we can do this. Do not even attempt to take off the masking if the paint is still wet, especially on this particular type of paper. It's not 100% cotton like I usually use, and it will, if you attempt it too soon and you're not careful, it will tear the surface, and we do not want that at all. So be very careful and you'll be alright. It's interesting, you've got to work out what is clothes and what is plants, because we want to take off the bits that are clothes and still leave the masking there of the grasses, so that we can get them in later. Right, now working with the same paint mixture that we had before of Payne's Grey and ultramarine mixed. We're just going to, whoops, I'm going to rotate so that I don't put strain on the thing. What I want is for these lines to be very, very, very fine, in a way that masking fluid can't make them. So what you've got to do then is go over with the brush if you lose one, don't worry, you're only intimating, remember. You can just pop them back. We also don't want them to be bright white, but we can knock that back as we go along. We won't want to take the pigment off underneath, particularly. masking fluid, great as it is, will always need to be neatened up. As you go to give you a sharp edge when you want a sharp edge. This is a lovely brush still, thank goodness it's... if you can find a brush that is a decent size, and this is a number 8, if you find a brush that is a decent size that points beautifully, you know, look after that one. That's what this one does that. This one points so beautifully, and because you're working with a largish brush, as you can see there, but it's got goes to such a lovely point, it will hold a lot of pigment. You don't have to be dipping in all the time. But you can get some really fine detailed lines. We don't want these to be vivid white, we just need them to be showing through. it's coming. Just basically tidying up the lines, making them finer, shaping them to be how you want them to be, rather than the blobs that are left by the masking fluid. But you imagine this is a lot easier than it would be to try and paint the suit of painting around these lines. That'll be almost impossible. This is so much easier. It's coming. What's the time, Mr. Wolf? It's 5 to 12. We'll just have time, I think, to put the finishing touches to the clothes and then come back a little later on and we'll work on the faces and the arms and then the plants in the foreground, and then just pull it all together. Pardon me. Sometimes you want that brush to be dry, sometimes you want it to be wet. That's fine. Sometimes you want the marks just to be there, just to give a feel of something that's there, but not being pedantic. This is nice because there is the little boat on his on his clothes, there is a touch of pink there, and a touch of a different type of blue. And a little touch of green too. And the windows on the boat. Which is nice. Because that just gives a tiny little hint of the girls' clothes in the boys' clothes, so to speak. And I think that, for the moment, is enough. We will, I think, add a little more pink to the girl's outfit to make that top zing a little bit more. Just be careful because you can lose it. You can lose the zing. If you lose too much of the paper showing through. So we'll come back after this afternoon and we'll do the faces and the arms and the plants, and hopefully this afternoon session should see it finished. I will post online a message to say what time I will be back. Not quite sure at the moment whether it's going to be a couple of hours time. Might be around about 2 o'clock. Might be a little bit later, all depending on what happens in the next 2 or 3 hours. But I will be back this afternoon to carry on and finish it off. Thanks for being with me this morning again, and I hope you have a nice lunchtime or a nice tea time, all depending on where you are in the world, or indeed if you have just crawled out of bed in the early hours of the morning in America. Good morning to you and have a nice breakfast. I'll see you in a little while.